Per Espen Stoknes è un economista e psicologo norvegese, famoso in rete per un TED Talk sul riscaldamento globale, membro della Norwegian Business School di Oslo, ex parlamentare dei Verdi. Fa parte del Club di Roma, dove dirige il progetto Earth for All, che aggiorna 50 anni dopo il famoso rapporto sui limiti dello sviluppo. In questa intervista parla dei due rapporti e presenta quello di Earth for All con un breve cartone animato subito prima dell'intervista. Tocca poi molti temi del suo libro, L'economia di domani, aggiornati alla situazione attuale.
The world has never been so rich, but we're still susceptible to shocks and crises. Can we build more resilient societies? Not utopian, but functioning and fair. This is the story of Earth for All. We assembled a group of economic thinkers and scientists and developed a computer model to test their big ideas. We then asked, what's possible in one generation? If we carry on as normal, population and material footprints continue to grow, particularly due to overconsumption in rich countries. The gap between the richest and everyone else widens. Social tensions worsen. Climate change impacts become ever worse. But what if the world takes a giant leap now, with 5 extraordinary turnarounds? In this possible and plausible future, all people can live a good life within safer planetary boundaries. We avoid the worst climate impacts. Poverty ends earlier. Population peaks lower. Well-being rises. Social tensions fall. Nature starts to heal. Incredibly, the investment needed is only 2 to 4% of global income. But we do need massive investments now, driven by governments on a clear mission to enact the turnarounds. Another big idea is a citizens fund for each country, where companies pay to use our commons, the wealthiest contribute fairly, and the funds are distributed to all citizens equally. But rebooting economies won't happen on its own. We need a global movement, kicked off with worldwide citizens' assemblies. This is Earth for All. How the story ends is up to you. Join earthforall.life.
And given that this year's topic is about limit, I would really like to start from a seminal book of the Club of Rome, The Limit to Growth, that was published in 1972 and makes this year its 50th anniversary. What do you think about this book? What has been the impact of this key report that was published in 1972 about the limit to growth?
So the Limits to Growth, published by a report to the Club of Rome from MIT researchers, created a whole new discourse within the public on how far can we push economic growth. Its main contribution was not, as most people think, that it predicted doom and catastrophe and collapse, but that it said something about the physical impact of the economy on the earth. So if you had much more resources than we assume, then pollution would cause uncontrollable problems. And if population got too big, that would, the consumption and the production would be the limit. So however we organized societies, there would always be physical limits to growth, not necessarily economic limits to growth, because value creation, money, is immaterial. And this confusion was never well picked up. But the main point of limits to growth was to make us aware that the economy has this huge material impact, which nobody really spoke about 50 years ago. And in that sense, it was agenda setting for the discourse over the next 50 years. And here we are. Now everybody is speaking about the challenge of overconsumption, the challenge of limited sinks in the Earth systems. How much can the Earth absorb of our physical outputs? So in some aspects, the numbers were not always correct, but the basic argument has been profound and maybe I would even say paradigm shifting relative to the discussion that was dominant before 1972.
This year we are publishing, you are publishing a new book with the Club of Rome called Earth for All. What are the content of this report, of this book?
So a lot of things are common between Limits to Growth and Earth for All. Both were based on a new macroeconomic model, which goes beyond the conventional macroeconomics to include the planetary boundaries, so the ecosystems, and also the social systems. So this is more like a global system model, both in Limits to Growth, where it was called World 3, and in Earth for All, where we call it Earth 4. So in it, we explore a number of issues that are relevant now. On the good news side, the fear of a population bomb that was very much prevalent and popular in the late 60s and early 70s, we see that has been solved. And the way it has been solved is primarily by the education and better health and public services to women in particular. So as women get more education and better access to jobs, they choose to have fewer children. So at the point of the Limits to Growth, the birth rate was, can't remember exactly, but maybe 3 to 4 women per child. And now it's down to almost 2, which solves the population issue. But we have other issues. So what the Limits to Growth called the pollution, we now call the climate crisis. Mm-hmm. So the climate system has been pressured into an unstable state. And in Earth for All, we see, what can we do? What kind of giant leap is possible to change the economic system in time to get back within planetary boundaries? Back in 1972, we didn't exactly know what are the limits. There was just this vague concept of pollution, which people could see like in gray smoke and dirty water. Now we know much more. Now we have the Earth system science approach, which tells us that there are 9 planetary boundaries, and 4 or 5 of them are currently in the high-risk zone. In Earth for All, we put a number of all of these, and we see when are we likely to push more and more planetary boundaries into the high-risk zone outside the safe operating space, and also what are the turnarounds we need to do, the systems changes needed in order to get back within a safe operating space by 2050, or at least in this century. So we update. Yeah, please.
Besides climate change, which other limits have we overcome? Have we surpassed?
So the planetary boundaries framework developed by Rockström et al. Points out that these 9 planetary boundaries include such thing as the ozone layer and the acidity of the ocean, like we have back here. So the 4 that are in high risk zone is climate, and then biodiversity, because our loss of species is maybe 1,000 times higher than the conventional rate of species extinction in evolution. And the 3rd is forests and land use change. So we have lost tremendous amounts of forests at a rate of about 100,000 kilometers forest loss per year for a long time. So we're getting critically low to tipping points, for instance, in the Amazon, and also wildfires in Siberia and other places. So that's number 3, land use change, but in particular, the loss of old growth forest, where most of the biodiversity live. And 4th is the overuse of fertilizer, nutrients. So that disturbs the freshwater systems and the coastal systems. So we have breakdowns in seagrass, kelp, local coast fisheries, loss of mangroves, all of these things that are the very productive marine ecosystems collapse. So those 4 are the main ones: climate, biodiversity, land use change, and nutrients. But we also see new reports just this year pointing out that plastics, for instance, seem to be disturbing the flow of particles in the ecosystems. So with too much plastics, we get too much of novel entities. So we may have collapses in ecosystems because at some point, suddenly the plastics and the toxics that are in the plastics make the ecosystems unstable. So maybe it's 5 out of 9, not just 4.
So climate change and biodiversity, but also land use change, deforestation, and plastic as well, they all belong to the economic sphere. So in order to remain in the threshold of those limits, we should change our economy. And in your book, you really try to tackle that. Just tell us why you decided to write this book with the title Tomorrow's Economy, and what should be this tomorrow economy?
In Tomorrow's Economy, I want to challenge the conventional set of metrics that are used to look at sustainability. The novel thing there is to provide a threshold level of a sufficient rate of change in resource productivity and social productivity. So building on the Italian tradition of Luca Pacioli and the Tractatus in terms of how to do credit and debit from Venetian bookkeeping in the 1400s, we've had 500 years of financial accounting. But we forgot to account for the world. We forgot to account for material flows, and we forgot to account for trust and the social capital of our societies, which is broken down by increasing inequality and worsening participation in the economy. So what I proposed in Tomorrow's Economy are 2 compasses where you can look at how systems are changing. So, you know, just before COVID, Greta Thunberg and the kids all over the world, they were taking to the streets and they were saying, we want systems change, not climate change. And in Tomorrow's Economy, I provide a compass because the kids don't really know what systems change is, or they can have an idea, it's low carbon and it's a better society. But in terms of real quantitative measurement, we can now see whether the system is changing quickly enough, because you can then see it's about more than 5 to 7% improvement in resource productivity per year. And similar in the social dimension, the value creation we have, how is it distributed between the top 10% and the bottom 40%, and whether you have a type of economic growth that increases inequality or brings inequality down so that the economy becomes more inclusive. If you have sufficient resource productivity and sufficient social productivity, then you have a healthy growth. If the resource productivity is too slow, then we're still heading full speed towards the limits. And if your social productivity is too bad, then we're heading towards loss of trust, more social fragmentation, polarization, and probably less coordinating capacity in the government, because people don't just trust each other or the institutions.
The book is a guide, so you provide a very interesting theoretical framework, but as well you bring a lot of examples. Do you want to make some example that can show our viewers what it means to change these 2 main variables?
Yeah. So when we look at the resource use in the current system, we see that most of the resource use happens in 3 value chains. These value chains are buildings, mobility, and food. In mobility, most of the diesel and gas a car uses goes to just heating the air and the engine and grinding down asphalt and wheel and running the air conditioner or the sound system. Just 1% of the energy used to move my body from where I am to where I want to be. So it's 99% waste and 1% usefulness. That is what I call resource wastefulness. If, however, we change to electric bikes or to electric buses and electric mobility in any way, particularly if it's intermodal and you can shift from micromobility to a bus or get where you want without a car, we can improve resource productivity with a 95%. So you get where you want using 95% less energy. That's like a factor 20 in times improvement on resource use in that dimension. The same thing with food. If I switch from processed meat for my spaghetti or my burger towards a pea-based protein or a grass-fed rotational slow food burger from sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture, then I can have a 90% reduction in the physical impact. So resource productivity is changing the way we produce and consume towards things that give us what we need, nourishment, mobility, but with a fraction of the current wasteful resource use. One company that has done this is Ørsted, a previous Danish company was called Danish Oil and Natural Gas, DONG, and now it's Ørsted. And what they did was to gradually sell off their fossil assets and reinvest in offshore wind. And now they are among the world's leading utility companies and in offshore wind. And they produce lots more and more power and earn more and more money while emitting less and less. So people get what they need, air conditioning or heat pumps or light, but without burning any fossil fuel. So the material use in that has been cut with more than 90%. So in this way, whether it's energy, food, or buildings, we can give people what they want, which is a comfortable living conditions, nourishing food that is good for your health, and we get around in a way we want without using all that material flow that we built up in the 1900s. So we have been blind to the resource wastefulness, and the opportunity of green growth is to reconfigure those values chains quickly so that we get much better lives, get our needs met with a fraction of the current resource use.
We've been discussing circular economy a bit too late, seems to me. We should have done this type of transformation earlier. So let me ask you this. Today, a lot of enterprises are trying to change their business model, try to become more sustainable, more socially inclusive. They starting to use this rating called ESG. So how can we really measure the impact of an enterprises and try to distinguish what is real sustainable from greenwashing?
That's a main issue that I bring up in tomorrow's economy. And my main answer is to look at the company's share of the national GDP relative to how quickly, just let me closer, relative to how quickly it improves its share. The good thing about GDP is that it's the sum of all value creation of the companies or the organizations in a nation. So if you add up all the gross margin or the gross profits, it will become the GDP. So if the GDP is 100,000 and my company is 2,000 units, then I'm responsible for those 2,000 of value added. The global average of value creation right now is that we make $2 per kilogram of CO2 emitted. This needs to improve to about $20, so a 10-fold improvement per kilogram of CO2 by 2050. Then in this way, if you want to see whether a company is doing its fair share of the transition, then you can see how quickly is it improving its value creation relative to what it used to do, how many percentages of resource productivity is it gaining. If it is improving with more than 5 to 7% per year, then it's part of the solution. If you are a company that may have very nice looking ESG, but in reality, your resource productivity is only improving with 2-3% per year, then you're part of the problem, no matter your ESG rating, because you're still influencing the economic system through your value creation in a way that doesn't bring down the resource waste quickly enough. The same way you can look at the social dimension. So how do you not just create value, but distribute it? There are in main 4 recipients of value creation. It's the employees, it is the government through tax, it is the shareholders, we should have a dividend, and it's the financial system that has given loans, so they will get interest on their loan. So how do you distribute the value you have been creating? And if you are giving more and more of your money to shareholders and less to employees and the government, then you are contributing to worsening the inequality. You have a company now who just its social impact is to concentrate the wealth to even fewer people. So the key variable to look at is the labor share of national incomes. So how much goes to the people versus how much goes to the owners. That is why also in Earth for All we do this owners' share of income relative to the labor share of income. If that goes up, then we are heading towards more inequality. And if that goes down, then we're heading towards more inclusiveness. And one thing is what the company does, and the other part of that equation is government, of course. So that's pre-tax and post-tax. We could have a look at both of those. In this way, if we use those numbers, the rate of change in resource productivity and the rate of change in your social inclusiveness, are we going towards more inclusion or less inclusion? Then you can see whether a company is really sustainable or healthy in terms of both green and fair growth.
So rather than a ranking system that just give you a picture of the actual situation, we need something that tells us which direction that the enterprise is going. So let's talk a bit about the energy. The last time we were having an interview, you were saying that the Russian-Ukrainian crisis could have the potential to actually fast and speed up the transition to renewables. Actually, the last International Agency for Energy stated that that's the case, that actually this crisis is actually leading to an acceleration in the transition to renewables. How critical is this to solve the climate crisis?
Yeah, it's actually Putin helping to solve the climate crisis. That's the craziness of the current situation. And in some perverse, absurd way, the answer is yes. And to understand why, we have to look at two things. One is from the point of the individual, and the other is from the point of the government. From the point of the individual, we all see how now that through our dependence on Russian oil and gas, we have become addicted or submitted to his whims. And what we need is freedom. We don't want to be dependent on some autocratic tyrant. So really now, with solar and wind, we get freedom energy. It's really freedom it's about. We can move about without paying Putin and his regime of violent thugs. I want freedom too from maybe the utility. Why can't I generate the power I need on my roof so I can be free of energy bills and free of having to depend on some coal or nuclear plant that I don't like down the road? So in my house, in our part of the town, or in our set of condominiums, we can go together and create a microgrid, a local provider of the power, and also maybe even local storage, and we can sell to each other, our neighbors and I, so we can have a local market of distributed generation and storage. This is where we're heading in terms of a decentralized energy system, as seen from the customer. On the other side, from the government side, it's all about energy security. Never again will Europe, at least in the foreseeable, long-term picture of decades, trust some Russia in terms of being our guaranteed energy supplier. So from a pure security and defense point of view, we need to ramp up our energy security. And energy security is more important than having the most cost-efficient solution. So we will now see a massive ramp up in investment to make Western countries have a higher degree of energy security. So whether you see it from the individual or from the government, the acceleration towards freedom energy and energy security is guaranteed to lift this up. Now, when this happens, of course, at the same time, prices on solar panels and windmills and electricians and microgrid storage will also go up. So their prices go up. But as long as the gas and the oil price are way up there, even though demand drives up prices now for renewable energy, it's still way cheaper than the gas price or the fossil price now and into the future. So those, for instance, who had a kind of solar utility grade project in Germany installed this year or last year, it's paid down in less than 3 years. So then you have almost 35 years of free energy generation with pure profits. So it is a dramatic shift in our energy system we're looking at right now. Putin didn't intend to do this, but it is a consequence or accelerated by his actions.
It's cheaper than any other sources, nuclear and coal included.
Absolutely, way cheaper, way cheaper. Also, nuclear takes so long time. I mean, I support nuclear power. Those nuclear plants that are running and can be run in a safe way, we do need them. They should be kept and upgraded and kept going. But if you start a new nuclear plant in Europe now, as we see in Finland with Ululuku, whatever it's called, Ululu, they planned for 7 years. It took 17, and it's 3 times budget, and it just broke down because of some little fuse there, or what's the right word? Nuclear isn't as safe an opportunity as a decentralized, cheap, renewable energy grid. Cheaper in the short term and cheaper in the long term, and that we see that also in investor behavior. So the private sector is really ready to invest in solar, wind, and batteries, but none of them are ready to invest in nuclear, because the benefits, the payback is 20 years down the road, and who wants to wait for 20 years if you can have a payback in 6 months? So that's that's why renewables is out competing nuclear, even though nuclear too is very good from a climate point of view.
Europe declared the engine car to be phased out by 2035. As an economist, do you think that's something feasible or that can be problematic, and how should we drive this transition?
Very important and timely question. So 2035 is not too late. It should maybe even be quicker, because the costs of electric cars and batteries are coming steadily down. Batteries have a very powerful learning curve, which means that each time you double the production, costs come down with 25%. And this hasn't happened with fossil cars. So very soon, electric cars will be cheaper too than fossil cars. We're talking about 2024, 2025. But of course, if you are just subsisting on a low income, and you have a car, and you can't afford an electric car or to upgrade the charging at home, then you have a challenge which has to do with inequality. So my suggestion would be to establish a subsidy mechanism in terms of leasing, because if you can lease an electric car, not necessarily buy it, then you will benefit from lower fuel costs, because it's easier, particularly if you can charge it from your own solar panels back home or your neighbors or whatever. So cheaper operating costs, cheaper maintenance, and you don't have to pay that much upfront because it's a leasing arrangement that is helped by the government. In that way, you will be able to get rid of your expensive fossil car, which is old, a lot of maintenance, a lot of fuel costs, and hopefully also higher tolls. At least in Norway, electric cars get a smaller toll road fee, so you can it's cheaper to run it into the center of the city than to run a fossil fuel car. All these things bring down the cost of ownership for electric vehicles dramatically. The only issue is the inequality, which is very substantial, that low incomes cannot afford the upfront cost of an electric car. But if we have a leasing arrangement or sharing arrangements, car sharing, we can get around that barrier. So also those with low incomes can get the benefit of having a car that is cheaper to own and operate.
We have been talking a lot about climate change, about decarbonization and energy, but there is another crisis, as you were saying before, there is another limit that we have to take care. Actually, probably is the most problematic and worrisome limit, which is the one related to biodiversity. And then soon, in the next month, in December, there will be the final conference for the Conference of Party on Biodiversity. How critical is that dimension, but especially how can enterprises measure their impact on biodiversity?
Again, very critical and timely topic. So we need to understand what is driving the loss of biodiversity. And
which is mainly agriculture.
Sorry,
which is mainly agriculture.
Which is agriculture, which is food. Exactly. Thanks for jumping in on that. In a way, we're eating the wild animals to extinction. And not directly. We're not killing birds like this one I have in my back here. We're not shooting them, but they die because their habitats are destroyed, particularly with cows and other sheep, goat that are grazing their habitats out of existence. So what we do need is to reduce the demand on acreage or the area that agriculture is having, because we have been having a food demand growth on average about 1.7 to 2% per year. So each year, 1.7% more food, but the productivity in the agriculture has only been 1%. So, and then the difference between that has resulted in expansion of agriculture. So we cut down more forest, we dam or we take away the wetlands, and we take more of the coastal areas into fish farming, for instance. So what we need to do is to take down the acreage, make more food with less use of area. And this is things we explore in the Earth for All book, in particular in depth. How do we do that? And the simplest answer is to stop the food loss, because a lot of food is lost from the farm towards the market. So we need to, and then it's lost even more in the rich countries' consumers, so the shops and the refrigerators. We throw away a lot of food unnecessarily. Second, we need to shift agriculture towards sustainable practices, which is smarter handling of the soil, regenerative practices, so that we can get by with less fertilizer and pesticide use, on more food from smaller areas, but better managing the soil, getting the carbon back into the soil, keeping the nutrients, looping the nutrients back into the soil. And finally, the most important thing is also to look at the change in diet. If people just eat a little bit less of grain-fed red meat and a little bit more of plant-based foods or fermented foods or other stuff that where you get it protein from other sources than the cow, then we will need less area both for grazing and grain, so that we can let the forest start to grow back. So this is the key actually to nature and biodiversity, to use less area and get the forests back. Hence, I propose in the book something called the forest productivity, which is the ratio of value creation to the amount of deforestation or reforestation. So can we create more value with less deforestation and more value with more reforestation, so we get the forest back? And if we get a rate of change about 3 to 4% there, so we have more value relative to the amount of forest, then biodiversity will start to rebound. Final comment on that. The good news is that Europe is also doing rewilding, and which is bringing back old species, whether the bison or the wolf or the chacal or the birds, beavers. So some areas in Europe are actually now rewilding in a way that haven't been seen in centuries. So these are very good news, and I love that in those initiatives so much. And Italy too, lots of it going on in Italy. Yeah,
we have bears actually here in this province, right? Here in Trentino, we have reintroduced almost 100 bears. Still hard to, have people getting along with those animals, but it's absolutely essential for for the health of the woods. So,
and the link to business is that you should have a look at how much area does the businesses purchases and products use, and could they make the same value creation for their customers while using less area to provide that. That is the key in terms of the diversity planetary boundary.
So who is the perfect reader of tomorrow's economy? Who do you think this book will benefit most?
Very good. I would like people who are a bit fed up with the doom and the apocalypse in the climate discourse, and who really care about nature, but can't stand the leftist, environmentalist, fundamentalist, or the right side, which is equally, who don't even care often about the nature. So if you have a heart for nature and you like business, this is the ideal reader. How can we use business to accelerate the systems change and bring on individuals and bring on the government, so we get coalitions? So those people who work between business and government, and those people who work in marketing between business and the individual, those are the target audiences that I hope will read the book. Because when you really understand how that system works, you can see how shifts in individuals will accelerate the shift in business. Shift in business can accelerate the shift in individual behavior, and both of them can push politicians to do the work that is needed and be re-elected when they've done it.
Thank you so much to Espen Stoknes, the author of Tomorrow's Economy, a guide to creating healthy green growth, by Franco Angeli, a book that I strongly recommend, probably the most important economic book since the dawn of the economy, of Kate Raworth, another amazing book that I highly recommend. So thank you so much for being with us, and I wish everyone who was watching this video a nice afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are.
Thanks so much, Emanuele, for having me. Wonderful to talk to you.
As always. Bye.
Bye.
All right.